Let's move to Sudan. The UN is warning of a risk of a massacre imminently. This is in the city of El-Obeid. 500,000 people effectively trapped inside the city. The rebel fighters of the Rapid Support Force, of the RSF, are laying siege to the north, the south, the west, and the corridor to Levi, the east, becoming more difficult for humanitarian convoys to get to. And the UN rights chief, Volker Turk, said this moment should be treated as, quote, a red alert of an unfolding catastrophe that the phones of world leaders, he said, should be running hot.
My office assessed that at least 6,000 people were killed in the span of just 3 days when the RSF captured al-Fashir. We found the RSF and allied militia committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, including mass killings, summary executions, sexual violence, and torture. These crimes were foreseen with repeated warnings by myself and my office, but they were not prevented. This is not a drill. It is a red alert that needs to land on the desks of heads of state and government around the world.
Well, he was speaking at the UN urgent debate, a rare one, in Geneva of the UN Human Rights Council. Amnesty International this week called for an international force to be deployed to prevent a repeat of what Volker Turk was talking about October last year, when the RSF are accused of genocide and other crimes against humanity and laying siege and then capturing the city in Darfur of El-Fasher. What he was talking about there and what Amnesty say is there is a likely to be an imminent assault and a possible repercussions of a potential massacre ahead. Let's go to Vienna. Let's bring in Jan Pospisil. Great to talk to you tonight, Jan, a Sudan affairs analyst of the Peace and Conflict Resolution Evidence Platform. First, let me ask you, it is incredibly difficult to assess exactly what's going on inside the city. It's difficult for journalists to get into Sudan, let alone into El-Obeid. What's your reading of the situation, how desperate it is?
It must be incredibly desperate since the siege is now going on for almost a year. So this is not a new situation. From what we know, the RSF has 3 sides of the city under control. So any supplies going in are incredibly difficult. There is drone strikes going on the city. There's permanent fighting, and it appears that the RSF is really committed, despite all international calls, to take this city. It's strategically important. But on the other hand, this means desperate situations for the people in the city. Though I have to say, I don't know how many people are really left. We know from al-Fashir that quite a lot of people have left before the last bit of fighting that really happened. But we don't have exact numbers. But for those still in the city, it must be a horror.
So we don't know if there are still 500,000 people there. That people may have left via the corridor to the east, because basically there's one route in, there's one route out, to the west, to the east, and the east up until now has been under the control of the Sudanese armed forces.
Yeah, that's my understanding of the situation. And of course, what the RSF tries to do is getting to this al-Fashir situation to really close down, get the city under full control, since the city is basically a gateway back to the center north, to areas that the RSF had under control in the beginning of the war, and that they are quite keen on getting back. So that's why they hardly. I don't think they will give in this particular siege.
And to that point, I mean, if there are messages landing on leaders' desks, and to your point that this is not new, it's been going on for some time. I guess what is new, why we're hearing it's a red flag, is because the level of the intensification of the siege. We're hearing what in the last 4 weeks, the RSF sending in drones, knocking out a third of petrol stations, cutting off fuel reserves, knocking out the main substation, which is also giving power to the city, providing clean water through water pumps. And we're hearing from the UN that that's being, well, they're being starved at that essentially. It's harder to get humanitarian aid in. And military assessments is that they are preparing, the RSF, for a ground offensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the playbook that we already saw in al-Fashir. This is a proper siege. This is not. This is really they're going all in there, and they don't care too much about the humanitarian situation on the ground. What is interesting already, and this is something that is politically not always understandable, and even in al-Fashir, the horror that happened there caused quite some problems within the coalition that is actually fighting with the RSF. They have to take into account the view of militias like the SPLM North that has basically no interest in all these atrocities. But still, I think in the end, they want this city, and they go with like really hard methods of like no aid in, no water in, until they basically are kind of not, there's no chance to fight anymore from the inside.
Yes.
We have to say, I mean, it's not that the South is really taking into account the destiny of civilians here. I would assume that human shields are used here. The South is not, it's not that the South is more human in a way, in the way they fight the war.
And you talk about the city, the aim of the RSF, just to basically reinforce that for us, because it's a city that's well known in Africa. It's nicknamed the Bride of the Sands. It's cherished culturally. It was on the Hajj route for centuries, from taking people from West Africa to Mecca. It's a trade hub. Its location as well. Tell us more about why the RSF is targeting this city.
Yes, it is basically from the infrastructure standpoint. It is also logistically the route back to the center north of the country. RSF could not, as you remember in the beginning of the war, RSF was controlling Khartoum for quite a long time and had also under control strategically important areas like Al Jazeera, which was one of the major agricultural schemes of Sudan since independence. And they lost these areas, not the least because they were not able to logistically generate like stable support lines and stable supply lines to these areas. And El-Obeid is for them considered to be the hub. If they control this, they might be able to establish what they never had before, which is a stable supply line further on, because I think they want at one point they will want to attack Khartoum, and this might be a step in that direction.
We're staying with you we can get the most part of what you're saying. It's breaking up slightly, but let me put this point to you in a potted history, if you will, as well, for those just trying to understand what's going on. So from 2019, there was a kind of people's uprising against the President Omar al-Bashir, the dictator for, 3 decades. Within that, there were the military leaders at the time that stood together. This is al-Burhan, the head of the Sudanese armed forces, plus Hameti, as he's nicknamed, the head of the RSF. They stood together, they allowed for the overthrow of the president. Then we saw what was going to be, the hope was, it was a democratic transition with a temporary council in place, and then they staged a second coup between the two generals, and out the window that went. So what we're seeing now is 3 years on of this bitter fight between the two of them for power. And bring in the other elements here and how you're seeing this dynamic change when you've got other vested interests, including the UAE, and the support that's going for each side.
What this problem between these bits of the armed forces is a long historical one. It's that the rapid support forces have been directly reporting always to Bashir, to the president, and were never real part of the staff of the regular Sudanese army. There was always two big competing forces, which was basically how Bashir survived that long. And as it turns out now, the alliance that overthrew Bashir, or allowed, as you have said, the overthrowing of Bashir, was short-lived. And what the RSF tried to manage is the support of the Emirates. There's different reasons for that. There's explanations that the Emirates are hugely interested in the agricultural potential. There is gold interests. But in a way, it's not all to be explained financially. It's not that the UAE need money, and the UAE invests quite a lot of money. Why the UAE are so entangled and so invested in the rapid support forces is indeed an open question. There is talk that Hameti is very close to MDZ, the de facto ruler of the UAE. So there's also personal relationships here, but it doesn't look like that the UAE are giving in. As we've seen the start of this war.
And so we now have this situation where we've got the head of the UN, the human rights chief, Volker Turk, saying this is a red alert. We can't officially send one, but please pick up the signal. Are we likely to witness whatever plays out in the hours, the days to come, that we are just going to witness this, world leaders too, from the sidelines, despite these calls?
The big issue is the UAE is not a country where the West would align and would say, okay, you stop this. This is not going to happen. The UAE is strategically important, as we know with the Abraham Accords and the whole section in the Middle East. The US are not bringing them anywhere, and nor will be the Europeans harder than they know that they can de facto do what they want here. They are careful in the way they supply weapons. There won't be ever Western weapons supplied. We know that the drones that the RSF uses are mainly Chinese, partly from Pakistan, and facilitated by the UAE and their money. So here there is certain red lines that the UAE don't cross. But truth to be told, it's a Sudanese war. On one hand, the Sudanese actors it's not a proxy war as such. But without the international support, this war would not go on like this.
Yes.
But truth be told, also the US and the UN, they can't stop this international support from happening, and they won't.
And so we have these ongoing talks that seem to be failing, stalling. This is a quad that they call them. The UAE are part of that. Egypt's part of that. The US is part of that. President Trump, who calls himself the peacemaker in chief, he has an envoy on Sudan. He talks about the wars that he's solved. What's the issue there? Is it that there's nothing clear to be kind of marking the palm with gold? And I say that in a sense of, look at Ukraine, mining deals offered. Look at DRC offering mining deals. Is there a lack of interest for President Trump on that front? How do you read that?
There is the presidential envoy for Africa, Boulos, who tries to lead the ceasefire negotiations now. But the problem here is the RSF, and in a way, this is the UAE-backed part in this, would be open to these negotiations. The problem is that SAF is very clear that they don't have interest to negotiate with RSF at eye level. And it's very hard to leverage SAF into doing that deal. SAF has now done deals with Russia. They have a tactical relationship with the Chinese. They get support from the Egyptians and now also tacit support from Saudi Arabia in their difficult relation with the UAE. And Saudi Arabia is also good with the US in a way. So the US don't really have the leverage anymore on both of these actors, really, to force them into a deal. So in a way, what we saw in Congo with the Rwanda DRC agreement, which is also difficult in its own way, but this is not going to happen in Sudan. This leverage is just not there.
Really good to talk to you, Jan. The US this week, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt saying that the US is, quote, actively engaged in efforts to bring about a peaceful resolution to the terrible conflict in Sudan. Jan, good to talk to you as always. Jan Pospisil, Sudan analyst at the Peace and Conflict Resolution Evidence Platform.